Well, good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to a special broadcast between me and Dr. Shawn T. Smith, a man that I've known for several years now. Have interviewed him, or I should say have a conversation. I don't like the word interview because it sounds more like an interrogation, and that's one of the things I don't do. And this is a great time. So we're kind of catching up live because we haven't talked in a while. So welcome to the show today, Shawn.
Hey, thanks for having me, George. I'm noticing that rooster on the wall behind you. I think every guy should have an image of a rooster somewhere in his house.
Yes, I've got a couple of them. You are a psychologist. You're in practice in Colorado. I want my audience, which I told you before, I don't have specifically a red pill audience. It's an audience, it's like what I would call a lifestyle audience, and they enjoy knowledge and wisdom. And you fit into the category of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm more than happy.
I don't know about all that, but thank you. It's very kind of you.
I think very highly of you, and I think people would be interested in your perspective on things. You're in a private practice. Tell us about your private practice. What do you specialize in? Who do you work best with?
Well, I started out working mainly with anxiety disorders back in the day, and I really enjoy working with anxiety disorders because there's a clear path, and usually people can get to a pretty clear solution to it. So that's fun. But I also started working with couples early in my profession, and I specialize largely in couples and men's issues right now, I would say. I still work with some anxiety disorders, but I like working with guys' issues, and I wrote a book called The Tactical Guide to Women, which sounds like this horrible pickup artist book. It's horribly misogynistic title, but I chose the title intentionally. It's about men choosing good relationships, and the reason I wrote that was because as I was working with couples and working with men, I noticed these themes where guys were coming through and they either had great experiences with marriage and relationships, or they had god-awful relationships, sometimes that just devastated them for years and decades. And so this book is about making the decisions that lead more to success than failure. But yeah, sort of what I do today.
That's fantastic. Do you find that men or women are more receptive to answers, to solutions, or is it equal?
That's a really interesting question.
Who's more resistant and who is more receptive?
I think that, let me think about this question for a minute, because I'm thinking in a couple of different directions that could go. I think that both sides are looking for solutions, but we have different ways of getting there. Probably everybody has seen that funny YouTube video of the woman with a nail in her head, and she's trying to process the fact that she has a nail in her head. Some things are going badly, and the guy that she's talking to, her boyfriend or husband, is just saying, "You got a nail in your head. Let's just pull it out." And guys want to get to things pretty quickly, and I think that's a reasonably good stereotype, whereas women want to understand more of the themes from the beginning. Yeah. I think guys tend to start with solutions and work to themes, and women tend to start with themes and get to solutions.
So you're saying men and women are different?
Oh God, no! That would be a horrible thing to say in 2021. That's yes. Men and women are different. Absolutely, it's wonderful. Like we're great together.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So the title of your book that you talked about is A Tactical Guide to Women. Obviously, it's for men. Is there a tactical guide to men?
I wrote a book before that called The Practical Guide to Men, and I chose those words practical and tactical specifically because I think women tend to make the mistakes that women are making when they choose men tend to be mistakes of the heart, and the mistakes, in general, nobody fits into a mold. People are individuals, but in general, the mistakes that men were making with women were mistakes of a tactical nature. They weren't thinking ahead. They weren't thinking about the larger situation.
Very interesting. Very interesting. How has your everyone has preconceptions. How does what you already believe about men and women affect the way that you deal with men and women professionally? Or can you separate yourself? Can you separate your beliefs about the sexes when you have two people in front of you or a patient in front of you?
It's a tough thing to do, and that's a really, you're great with the questions, George. It's a tough thing to do when I'm working with a couple that comes through the door, because of course I have my preconceptions about men and women that are emotional and unhinged from reality. I also have my preconceptions that are more research based and more empirical. And when a couple comes through the door, I have to do the work of setting that aside, because I don't know what they're about. I don't know who's dominant, who's less dominant in the relationship. I don't know what their relationship is about. So it's a tough job. But every individual that walks through it's a tough part of the job. Every individual that walks through the door, you have to set aside your preconceptions too, because I work as a behaviorist, which means that I try to gather data about the individual and work up from the data, rather than starting with a principle and working down from a principle to the individual. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both approaches, but my approach says I got to try to set myself aside.
How is a behavioral approach different than a cognitive behavioral approach? Most people think, when they think therapy, they think of a CBT. How are you different in that?
They're in the same school, but within any schools of thoughts, whether it's like martial arts or psychology or whatever it is, there's these factions that develop. And what's ironic about the factions is that usually people find their philosophical home and they end up in the same or a similar place, regardless of where they started from. And so with psychology, that's oftentimes the case, is that people will start with a different foundation, CBT, psychodynamic, purely behavioral, and they'll end up with similar solutions, because how do you not? If you're really putting your work first and not your agenda first, you're going to arrive at a similar solution to the other person who's putting their work first and not their agenda first. So I think in all of that, I lost track of your question.
Well, I was saying why behavioral versus cognitive behavioral, but then the title of your books kind of tips me off. Practical and tactical, two very tangible things. You're not like a theorist.
I'm not a theorist. I have my theories too, but no, I'm not a theorist. I like to collect the data and then see where the patterns emerge, which is just one approach. I think it's the approach that if you're trying to solve a problem, like a couple comes in and they've got this problem, this pattern that they've been sitting with for years. If you're trying to resolve that problem quickly and efficiently, you start with an inductive approach, which is you collect the data and you see where the patterns emerge.
Yeah. I was following. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'll just add as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to starting with a theory, like maybe you got into attachment theory, and so every couple that comes through the door, you're going to try to view them through the lens of attachment theory, and there's some value in that, but I just find it less efficient than a purely behavioral approach. Yeah,
I was following some streams and threads on Twitter about the differences between men and women, and I had suggested something. I believe it was this morning about how everybody wants to do better. Men look for women because you don't look for a woman because you want to do worse in life. You want to do better. You want to be happier. I invite a woman into my life because she enriches my life. I want better than what I have now. I want to add to what I have now. A woman wants a man because she wants to add to her life, which leads us to the concept of hypergamy, which in some of the circles that you and I have traveled in, that seems to be it's a big word. And my argument this morning, I shouldn't say argument, I should say my case, because I don't want the scenario to follow the words that I use. So if I say argument, it's going to be an argument. I don't want it to be an argument with my audience or with the people that follow me on social media. Everybody wants the best that they can get. Everybody. Why is it when a man wants the best, we call it pursuing excellence and being the best version of yourself and so forth, but when a woman wants the best for her, it's called hypergamy. Is there a weird one-sided door? Doesn't that door swing in both directions or not?
Yeah, I guess it would depend on your definition of hypergamy, and if the definition is one that's sort of derogatory, that hypergamy is a bad word.
Yeah.
Because if it's a bad word, then I guess there's a double standard. And if it's not a bad word, if it's just the way things work, then probably there's no double standard.
Yeah. How do you deal with people that only use the one definition of it? I happen to like the definition that says that door swings in both directions. I want the best for my life. She wants the best for her life. And we kind of come together, and it's like what I'm good, like when it comes to division of labor, when it comes to, I might be more outgoing, she's more introverted, where we complement each other. I like that. I'm not looking for when I was looking, I'm not looking for a female version of myself. I don't need a George clone. I don't need a female version of me. I'm looking for something different, which to me would be better. She's looking for something that's going to make her life better. She looks at my qualities and says, I would like those things in my life. I like that temperament. I like that personality. I like that either soft-spoken thing, or I like the aggressive thing. You know, the woman who might have had a very passive husband, maybe second time around wants a guy that's a little more assertive or something like that. And the guy in his second time around, his first wife might have been only interested in staying in hotels, and he wants a woman who'll go camping and sleep in a tent or something like that. Mm-hmm. We all want, I think we all naturally seek a peaceful life. That's how I kind of view it, that the door swings in both directions. Comment on that versus that rigid kind of thing that some of our circles have talked about.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying I also have thought about what it would be like to be married to me. It would be hell. God, it would be a miserable experience.
Wow.
But my wife seems to like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think I would enjoy being married to someone exactly like me. But so let me boil down the question a little more. So how do you deal with, or how do you respond to people who have sort of a rigid view of the genders?
Hypergamy.
Hypergamy.
Yeah, kind of like what we've dealt with for the past 2 or 3 years in the quote unquote manosphere and so forth. That definition of hypergamy.
Yeah. So let's talk about definitions for a minute, if that's good, just to establish the premise here. So there was the word hypergamy, as far as I know, and I looked into this pretty deeply. The first time it showed up was in the late 1800s. There was this census taker in the Punjab region of India, and he noticed that men in that region were trying to marry their daughters to men of higher caste than themselves. So women trying to marry up, really it was men trying to get their daughters and their families to marry up. So he used as far as I know, he coined the term hypergamy to describe that dynamic. And that definition is really pretty boring. It's just the notion that women want the man of highest status that they can get. That's not very interesting. And men want the most attractive woman they can get. These are not interesting ideas. The manosphere, parts of the manosphere have taken that definition and then they've added pieces and parts to it. Some of it's good, some of it's not. And when I say good, I mean some of it's very useful and some of it's not very useful. I think it gets in the way. And they've turned hypergamy, sort of crowdsourced this idea of hypergamy into an entire theoretical framework. It's almost like a unified theory of women. If you know this one thing about women, this hypergamy theory, then you understand everything a woman does, from cheating to divorcing to whatever. Everything is based on the idea that the woman is always, I don't want to overstate anyone's position here, so I'm trying to be descriptive but not overly careful, that women are constantly scanning for the better option, and if you're not her best option at the moment, she will go for the next best option. The problem with that is that it ignores the fact that women are, to quote Robert Glover, who wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, that women are are security-seeking creatures. So yes, it's true that women want the best option they can get, just like everybody does. Women are also driven not to disrupt their lives. So hypergamy, this whole theory that says women will disrupt everything if a better option comes along. And I know there are people who say I'm misstating the position. Fine, whatever. I think that's a reasonable summation. It's oversimplified but reasonable. That it ignores the fact that women don't really want to typically disrupt their families, uproot their children, separate from in-laws, go through the divorce meat grinder. And even though women do better in divorce court than men, pretty reliably, that doesn't mean they want to be there. It doesn't mean it's a picnic for them. And that's the side that I think this sort of strident hypergamy theory overlooks.
Mm-hmm.
And women are also typically, like human beings, we're social creatures. They tend to be very loving, and they get attached, and they don't just sever attachments in a willy-nilly fashion.
Yeah. My maternal grandmother had an arranged marriage. Prior to that, I have a whole history of arranged marriages. When I think about hypergamy as is described and talked about in the Manosphere, the men's community, it seems to apply to the women doing the choosing of the mate, mm-hmm. which, in light of history, is a relatively new event, if you think about it. I mean, I have 3 children. One of those children is a daughter. If I had to choose for her, if we were still choosing the mates, if we were arranging the marriages of our children, I would think I want the best for my daughter. I would vet the man. I would talk to his parents. I want to see what kind of house he came from. How is that different than now a woman doing that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In that original definition of hypergamy, it was the men. It was exactly what you just described, the men doing the choosing for their daughters, which is kind of ironic because it's a word that supposedly refers to female behavior, but it was actually male behavior as it started out. But I don't know what the difference is. Yeah.
I wonder if women today would trust their fathers enough to choose a mate for them.
My daughter wouldn't. I was joking with my 13-year-old daughter about this, about how I would marry her off to the kid at school that she doesn't dislike this kid, but she doesn't, she feels no romantic interest toward him.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I think things have changed when we've gone from I'm going to give a cow, 3 goats, and 6 pigs to a father as a dowry for his daughter. Things have changed since then.
Yeah, it's a lot of things have changed for the better. I mean, that women have more agency. Women have full agency, at least in Western culture, as to who they choose. It's good development, in my estimation. Some people don't like it, but I do.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, well, people pay. Men are paying anyways, whether it be, a dozen cows and sheep and goats, to they're paying in another way. Some guys would say that. I would say that they're being a little more cynical than I like. Where does cynicism come from when it comes to men and women going into relationships?
I think cynicism on all sides of the equation tends to come from injury. And the injuries can be very old. Like the injuries could be just your parents not having good relationships with you, because it's really up to the parents to steer that relationship. And if they steer it poorly, it could lead a person to think toward this nihilistic viewpoint that, well, it's not going to work out, so why try?
Why try? All right. So let me clarify. Cynicism comes from injury, which is embodied in the statement, why try? And about 20% of my audience is like that. Why even try? And I worked really hard at developing an audience that thinks, that's not a raw emotional nerve that's just knee jerk to everything. And why try? Like, there really is no, like, think about it. That's the ultimate dead end question. Why try?
Yeah.
It's the only question. It's the only statement with a question mark where there's no satisfactory answer for the person who asks it, because I
Right.
can give you 10 reasons why you should try.
And if I'm cynical and nihilistic, I'm going to shoot down every one of those reasons because I'm just
Wow.
trying to protect myself.
Yes.
And you're threatening my protective barrier when you start to argue against why I should try, argue for why I should try.
Yeah, I interviewed Stefan Molyneux. Oh, probably. Well, I guess it was a year ago at the Patriarch event, and I asked him. I said, "Everyone says this is not a good time to have kids. Like, why would you want to bring a child into this world?" And he went off for 20 minutes of why we should be married, why we should bring children into this world. Like a really bright, optimistic view, glass half full kind of thing, but not so lofty and idealistic, which is what I'm accused of all the time, is I'm called an idealist. And I guess that's not a bad thing to be accused of, considering the alternatives. And he ended his little 20-minute tirade with, he said, get married, have children, save the world. And I liked that. That appealed to the idealist in me. There's never been a good time to have kids.
No, the world is always in flux. And this, 2020 has shown a lot of people that bad things can happen. I think we've had, here in the US anyway, we've had a couple of generations of people who walk around with, not of their own fault, but walk around with the idea that bad things don't happen, everything's going to work out okay. And that's not historically how it is. In the end, things always work out okay, but it's always a bumpy road. And so we're hitting some bumps right now, and I see people coming to the realization that, yeah, bad things can happen. And what indicates to me that people are realizing this is that I see behaviors changing. I see people like stocking up on food a little bit and doing the sort of things you do when you know that bad things can happen.
Yeah. So do you think there is what's the prescription for cynicism that was created through injury, trauma, chaos? What do you think? What would you prescribe for somebody who you have identified or diagnosed? Well, cynicism is not a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But between you and
diagnosed in the vernacular sense, yeah.
Yeah. What would be the proper prescription for cynicism?
Well, for me, I don't try to fix anybody. I will help people fix their problems. And I tend, after doing this for a while, I've gotten fairly good at that. If a person wants to find solutions to things like anxiety or bad relationship patterns, yeah, I'm pretty good at that. But if a person is walking around with the belief that it's not going to work out, relationships aren't going to work out, jobs aren't going to work out, whatever it is isn't going to work out for me, who am I to mess with that? Because I don't have their experience. I don't know what they've been through to bring them to this point until I start to hear their story. And I guess my approach is just to be a different kind of example, that, yeah, you can come from some bad backgrounds. And there are lots of examples like this, right? Especially in the Manosphere. There are a lot of great examples of guys who come from pretty bad backgrounds and they're living the dream because they've done a certain amount of work. And I think that really that's the best approach to somebody whose feelings are hopelessly cynical, is just to be aware of the fact that there are other experiences out there. But you can't force it down anyone's throat, because we were talking about earlier that it's their defense against the world. And you're saying, hey, why don't you drop your shield? And they're saying, hey, screw you, pal. I'm not going to drop my shield.
Yeah.
So let me jump back to hypergamy for a minute, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Because I want to talk about the upside of that, because it's sort of in line with what we're talking about here, about not being cynical. That I think the way the that corner of the Manosphere, the red pill community, has crowdsourced this overblown theory of hypergamy that I think doesn't really hold up when you really start to scrutinize it. There's also some really good lessons in it, and to me, it makes it worthwhile. Like I don't care that the theory isn't perfect, because some of the lessons are really important, and they're lessons that my profession of psychology, and I know you used to be in the field too, that our profession does not give to men. And it's almost inhuman. It's almost a crime that we don't tell men this. And I think the primary lesson is that you got to have your act together. Like you can't, there seems to be this belief out there in the culture. I think that the red pill community sees this in my profession, sees in the culture in general, that you're okay the way you are. And if you're just yourself, she'll love you. And that's nonsense. If you're born into a man's body, sorry, that's Fonzie out there. If you were born into a man's body and you're going to identify as a male, I guess that there's expectations. And there's a social psychologist out of Florida named Roy Baumeister who has looked at societies throughout time and across cultures, and there's a universal expectation that men show up and provide something. And I guess one way to think about that is that if you're a man in a community, you provide more than you consume. That's sort of a real basic definition. But the fact that professions like mine are not, I don't know if they're not aware of this, but if you're coming into the world as a man and you believe that you're going to be accepted just the way you are and everyone's going to love you the way you are, that's a horrible message. And so the message of hypergamy is, no, you need to get your ass out of bed and go out and do something every day. And that's going to be a much happier, productive, more efficient life for a man than everybody's going to love me the way I am. Bullshit. That doesn't work that way for men.
Yeah.
It works that way for little girls and dogs.
Right.
Doesn't work that way and little boys, little boys too, but it doesn't work that way for men.
At about what age in a man's life does that become a reality, that you have to do more than just exist? What do you think? I
think it starts to happen when, this is just my guess. I don't know if there's research on this, but my guess is that when that boy starts turning into a teenager and his voice starts changing, he gets that weird little mustache and people start getting a little uncomfortable with his awkwardness. And is this kid a boy or is he a man? When he's in that phase and people are starting to respond to him, he's not cute anymore. They're responding to him a little more differently. It starts then. You better start getting your act together.
Yeah. Different boys come of age quicker than others. There was always the one guy that had a beard in 10th grade.
Right.
There was the guy that had the mustache in 9th grade. There was the guys that were super muscular and just like incredible wrestlers in high school. And then there were those that were softer, pudgier, didn't seem to exhibit more masculine type behavior. Their voice was still a little bit higher. So that whole coming of age thing really is on a spectrum, isn't it? There's a continuum there.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah. Is there a coming of age? Is there a dynamic equivalent of that with women?
Where they turn from little girls into women?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that. Well, I think there's, and again, this is getting more into my opinion than any clinical expertise, but it seems like when women start to show signs of sexual maturity, then the world starts getting a little uncomfortable with thinking of them as children and starts starts treating them different. So I don't really know what the expectations are for women at that age, because men have boys and men have expectations. Women are sort of, this is, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. This is another point that Roy Baumeister makes, that women are considered women by virtue of their physical maturity, and men are considered men by virtue of their accomplishments. And so I think that physical maturity is probably the dividing line between girl and women, and that's got to be a little bit rough for girls to go through that transition. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right about that. I never thought of that. That is so true. There's different times of arrival.
Yeah, times of arrival. Good term. Yeah.
Yeah. What I think of. Go ahead.
Well. So, girls that mature physically very early, and I can remember this from grade school, suddenly the attention shifts entirely around them. Like there's a girl in sixth grade that I went with, she matured very quickly, and she became kind of voluptuous and very attractive. And looking back on it, I feel kind of bad for her, because one day she's a little girl, and then the next day everybody's treating her, or I shouldn't say treating, but responding to her as if she's a sexual being. And God, what an abrupt transition that had to be for her. And then other girls are 16 before anything starts to happen. Not so much these days, but because kids are maturing faster physically than they used to.
There's something on Netflix right now that's been getting a lot of press. I haven't followed it. I've only seen it in the past couple days. And it's about the sexualization of children. And
yes,
I've always heard about
the Netflix thing called Cuties now, where we've got 10-year-olds twerking. It's kind of repugnant.
Yeah, that's very disturbing just to hear about that.
Yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like little girls get sexualized. For instance, little girls will have makeup put on, like the John Benet Ramsey, the pageant girls, this kind of thing. And they dress like little women. But there's no equivalent of that with boys. You don't see boys dressing like construction workers. We're not in a hurry to make them grow up, but we take these little girls and we thrust on them this adulthood, and it's not even healthy adulthood.
Right.
It's a
sexualized.
It's sexualizing. It's perverted. What is going on with society where girls are the first of the two genders to be sexualized? I just find that quite disturbing.
Yeah, I don't know, and I've never really thought of it quite in those terms. Although having a 13-year-old daughter, I've been very aware of it, and I try to insulate her as much as I can from things that aren't developmentally appropriate for her. Things like certain political discussions. She doesn't need to worry about at 13. She needs to be worrying about reading the Odyssey and trying to figure out those kind of themes and being sexualized. And I'm very lucky that she's kind of a bookish kid, and she doesn't buy into the culture that she could be buying into. And I'm gotta just count my lucky stars for me and for her, because it's going to make life easier for her. But as a dad, I'm really very aware that these forces are just constantly out the door like wolves, trying to pull her into a place that she's not ready for.
Pull her into a place that she's not ready for. Wow. And some of those girls are now adults now, aren't they? I mean, they're college age. This has been going on for a couple decades.
Yeah, and I don't have many college age women in my life, so I'm not really sure. I mean, I hear the stories, but I'm not really sure what that world is like right now. It looks like kind of a rough place in some ways.
Yeah. Where is there hope for women right now? I probably have more women in my audience than any of the other shows that you've been on. Women who communicate with me on a regular basis. And this is not a gynocentric broadcast in any way, because I like to think that I communicate to people and not just men or just women. But the about 12% women that I have out of the 150-something thousand are very vocal with me. Give the ladies hope. Okay.
Well, I'll clarify again. This is more my personal opinion than my clinical opinion. I just try to separate those two, because they don't always line up. In this case, I think they do. That I think the hope is to be found in your circle of friends, your inner circle. You choose people that are good to be with. If your family's good to be with, then you're blessed. And your elders and the people who have done something in the world and been around the block a few times. I think that inner circle is the antidote to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these false images about how perfect you should be and how sexualized you should be. And sexualized is different than sexual. Everybody should be sexual because it's fun, but sexualized and that's your identity. I don't know. I don't see the value in that.
Yeah. Where is there hope for men?
I think the same thing. That men face some of the same battles in terms of let's take Tinder, for example.
Yeah.
There's this fairly well-known stat out there that 80% of women on Tinder go for 20% of men. And it's something that men rightfully, I mean, it is what it is, but men complain about this. And I think it's a legitimate thing to complain about. It's also a legitimate thing not to participate in, because I think what's happening there is that that is hypergamy in action, I guess. That's a good example of young women being hypergamous and trying to get the best they can. But when people meet in real life, in the real world, men tend to be pretty visual about women, and women are looking for different things in men. They're looking at behaviors. They're looking for things like, does he have a sense of humor? Is he socially dominant? How does he carry himself? How at ease is he with himself? How comfortable do I feel around him? Does he make people smile? Does he have a little bit of social dominance? These are all perfectly non-visual cues that women are looking at. And men do some of the same thing, but it's more heavily weighted. Women look for non-visual cues. So you go on a place like Tinder, and all you have is a little picture of somebody. All of that other information has been set aside. So this guy that looks beautiful, he's the top 20% on Tinder. He may be the bottom 20% if he meets somebody in person. And so I think the hope for men, again, is be connected to other people in the real world. If you're actually, we're not necessarily talking about meeting women, but if you're trying to meet women in the real world where they can actually size up who you are, and they can make good decisions and you can make good decisions. And as far as the hopelessness and the nihilism that's out there in the society toward men, there's a lot of hostility toward men right now. Don't go where you're not wanted. If you're a man, why on earth would you go to a university campus right now? You're going to be universally hated. There are some campuses like Hillsdale is one where that doesn't appear to hate men, but as a man, you're going to be universally seen as an oppressor, as somebody who's potentially violent, as a potential rapist. You're running a tremendously increased risk of false accusations, even though we've had some good Title IX reforms lately, which are very pleasing. But, why would you go there? Pick people that you're around with, family that you can count on, friends that you can count on, build your community. And that's the antidote to all of the nihilism and hopelessness.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about corporate recruiters, and they talk about people. Let's just move this over to that world for a second. And a recruiter might have someone's resume and say, well, this candidate looks good on paper. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of the online dating thing. They look good on the screen on your phone. And then there's the disconnect. The recruiter wants to meet the candidate before he starts recommending the person to different job positions somewhere. And I think that's what like a first date is like. It's like, okay, they look good on paper, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So now we'll meet them. And one of the things that we don't hear is like a recruiter might give you an exit interview. He might give you a mock interview and then say, okay, this is where I think you fell short. This is where I think your strengths are. This is what I think you need to change, because if I put you in front of an employer, they're going to view this as a weakness. You need to emphasize this in your career a little bit more and whatever. When it comes to dating, women don't give exit interviews. They just say, oh, not interested. I don't think it's a good match. What are they really thinking when they use those terms? What do you think?
I think there's as many answers to that question as there are individual women, but I agree with you. Women don't give exit interviews unless you ask them. I have had, I think, only two male clients who have said, you know what? I want to know what it was like to be with me. I want to know what I did right, what I did wrong. And they went out and they sought ex-girlfriends and asked them open-ended questions about, okay, what happened in our relationship? Very bold thing to do, especially if you've been separated from somebody for a couple of years, to go back and say, hey, I want to know what happened. I want to know what it was like to date me or be married to me or whatever. And these two guys got what seemed to them to be fairly honest answers. And in a sense, it's kind of a terrifying thing to do, but it's also a great way to get a lot of information about yourself. Mm-hmm. So I think you can ask for that interview if you've had some, some kind of meaningful connection with somebody. If it's just somebody you met at I don't know. I was going to say, I don't, if it's somebody that you just met and they just rejected you, maybe you could ask them, wait, why, what was it about me? Why? And maybe they would give you an answer. I don't know. I think most people are pretty polite when they don't know you very well, and they don't know what they can get away with. And so I don't know that you'd get very honest answers in that situation, but maybe.
I did a video with a woman, and I said, what do you look for in a man? What makes a man handsome? And she says, two things I look at. She said, I look at a man's hands because that will tell me a lot about him. She says, and I look at his shoes. I said, shoes? She goes, oh, you have no idea how many men just have crappy shoes. They're scuffed. She said, shoes, the shoes that a man wears and the condition they're in tell a lot about him. And I thought, I'm scratching my head. And I've never heard that before. But I don't think like a woman. So why would I think that? Wasn't there a book about thinking like a woman or something like that? Wasn't there some... Did Steve Harvey write a book about that, or am I thinking someone else?
Yeah, I didn't read it. He wrote something the title was along the lines of "Think like a woman, act like a man," or "Act like a woman, something like that.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to have a bunch of candid interviews with ladies and see what they like. For instance, you see some women on the dating sites back when I was doing dating sites some time ago, where they said, I don't want to see it. If you're holding up a fish or a dead deer, I'm not interested, or swipe left or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, or like, if you're not wearing a shirt, swipe left, like all the things that they experience. Now, I never did dating sites from the perspective of a woman, although it'd be interesting to see how men market themselves.
Yeah.
But to me, I just don't see, like, I kind of get where they're coming from, even though I like fishing, I like hunting. I don't think I'd ever have a shirtless picture of myself or anything like that. But there seems to be a disconnect between what men think women want and what women actually want. Can you comment on that?
Yes, especially with younger guys, there's a big difference between what they think women want and what women want to some degree. You live in Philly, right?
Yes.
And I'm in Denver, so we're both in large metropolitan areas, and you can see young guys driving around in cars. They've taken cars that aren't tremendously expensive, and they're not driving Ferraris, but they'll glue a bunch of plastic shit to the sides, spoilers, and then take the muffler off, and it's all peacocking, right? And young guys,
it's got nothing to do with performance. It like really doesn't enhance the performance. It's just like you said, glued on stuff. Yeah,
louder and more ornate is what they go for. And part of this is a large part of this is a message to other guys. That's typically what it is. But why would they be sending a message to other guys while they're sending a message to other guys? Largely because that's sending a message to other women. And so young guys tend to do this peacocking sort of thing. Whereas an older guy, because they think that's what women are looking for, and women are to some degree. Young men don't understand that it's the qualities that go along with the peacocking that they're looking for, not the peacocking. And so when guys get older and they get a little more mature, then they can zero in on those qualities and they can drop the peacocking stuff. You don't see a lot of 40-year-old guys with a Wings West spoiler taped to the back of their car, right? So, so what young guys tend to think women want, and what young women tend to think will work in relationships, tend to be pretty all over the board. But they're young, so of course they are.
Yeah. I saw a meme not too long ago that had kind of like a split. There was two frames. One frame said, what women think men want, and it showed a group of girls with the mini skirts on, the heels and the cleavage and the whole thing. And then the other frame was what men really want, and it showed like these almost like Mennonite Amish looking, like in these long dresses and their hair up in a bun. And I guess they were using hyperbole to prove a point, but the reality is what women want, what women really think men want is is wrong. It's like the more flesh you show, you think you might attract more men, but that doesn't mean a better quality man. I mean, you're not going to, I don't think you're going to attract a husband with cleavage and a short dress. You might, but you're going to attract a guy who wants, you're going to draw a lot of attention. You're going to attract a guy that wants a good time.
Yeah. Yes, you'll draw a lot of attention, and amongst the men who are giving you attention, there might be somebody where there's a relationship that could work out. But so much of the signaling that men and women do is for their own gender. Women do a lot of signaling to other women. It's not all toward us. Like fingernail polish is probably one example where guys don't care about fingernail polish, but women do it, and it's part of preening. And both sides do it.
Yeah. What makes a man handsome? We'll talk about men and women. What makes a man handsome? What do you think? What is your opinion? I don't know if there's any clinical explanation here, but what would make a man handsome in this culture?
There is the clinical stuff like symmetry and body shape, and all that stuff has been very well quantified in evolutionary psychology. What makes a man handsome? I think that something that I'm not very good at all is just clothing and presentation. I'm working on my game, but just being able to dress well and have clothes that fit you, and these sort of things send a message that they send a message about competence. And so I think a guy who, again, personal opinion, I think a guy who's not particularly attractive can become very attractive to other men and other women simply through the way he presents and carries himself physically.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do a whole lot to drop 10 pounds, put on a little bit of muscle, have a slightly better shape than you used to have, and really make yourself more attractive.
That's true. That is true. I know that has different cultures have different ideas of what beauty is. Some cultures, they have like the women with the long necks and those rings around their necks, and that's considered attractive. I guess in certain older Asian cultures, they used to do feet binding or something like that. So horrible. Like really, just
horrible practice.
So these strange cultural things that have happened over the years. What makes a woman beautiful? Let's ask the flip side of that question.
I'm going to defer to you first because I don't know how to answer. I know what's beautiful to me, but what's beautiful to me is not the same thing as what's beautiful to the next guy. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to like the more conservative, nerdy women. Like I can see through I like the sexy librarian. I mean, that's kind of like my thing.
How do you think is that just an innate attraction you have, or is there something that gave you that attraction, or is it both?
It's probably innate. Like, for instance, Hot for Teacher does nothing for me. The old Van Halen video. Like, I look at that woman, walking on the students' desks, in that video. I just don't, to me, that does nothing for me. Never did.
An interesting thing is that, and I haven't sorted this out because I haven't read quite enough about it, but we tend to seek genetic variability. So we tend to, as far as I know, be attracted to people who are physically a little different than us, but also we tend toward assortative mating, which means we seek out people who are similar to us in other ways, socially similar to us, or similar to us in depression, or similar to us in income and background, or whatever. The caste system is a really good example of assortative mating taken to the extreme. So I haven't sorted out how those opposing factors reconcile in any given individual mind.
Very interesting. It's a lot of times the men's community, people get a little bold and they get vocal. Somebody reads a book or two, and then all of a sudden they think they're experts on intergender relations or something, and they start, they never criticized a cousin before. Like when I hear a man say, "Yes, dear," and I'm guilty of it. When I hear a man say, "Yes, dear," I automatically think like, oh, this guy's a wimp,
Uh-huh.
and kind of a pushover. And then there's part of me that says, okay, you're being a little too aggressive in your thought. Maybe that works for them as a couple. Maybe they have terms of endearment for each other that work for them in that relationship. I don't remember my grandparents really hassling and troubling over gender roles or anything like that, or how they talk to one another. I just don't, when I look back on it, I just see, okay, it kind of worked. They didn't seem particularly over the top in love with each other. I don't see screaming examples of hypergamy. I don't see, my grandfather pursuing a hot chick, 75 years ago or anything like that.
It did happen, though. There were affairs back then.
It did.
And in some cultures, not to shoot down your point, because I know you're building to a point, but in some cultures, it's perfectly acceptable to have a mistress.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing. That's not really what you're talking about here. You're talking about gender roles and things working.
Yeah. Yeah. What works for a couple? Works for a couple, and what works for one couple might not work for another, especially if a man becomes more aware or awakened in his marriage after so many years of marriage. Like, red pill kind of guys all of a sudden coming home from a weekend seminar start using a different language. And the wife is like scratching her head going, what the heck happened to you? And she's not meaning that in a complimentary kind of way.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of good and useful information out there in the Manosphere about being present in your relationship. And some of it's not so useful, and some of it is. But if the overall message is, hey guys, be present in your relationship, that's a good message. And so if you have a guy who has not been present in his relationship, like fully involved, assertive, stating what he wants and honestly asking what she wants and being, taking accountability for his side of the relationship, and he hasn't been doing that, it's going to be disruptive. There's this family systems psychologist from back in the, I don't know when he was writing 70s and 80s, named Salvador Minuchin. You probably read about him. And
I do.
He talked about family systems and how one of his points was that when you have a balanced system, even if it's not balanced in a great way, like maybe you've got an alcoholic in the system and that's part of the system, but everybody's balanced and things are functioning and everybody's working around this alcoholism, and then the person gets clean and sober, that the other parties in that system may unwittingly try to pull him back into his old habits. And it's not that they're trying to tear him down, it's that the system is unbalanced and people will try to reestablish the balance that they know and they're familiar with. And so I think I've seen with my own two eyes a similar thing where a guy sort of wakes up in a relationship and he decides he's going to be more present, and it's unsettling and it's unbalancing, and there needs to be a little bit of conversation. There can't be too much conversation because there is such a thing as talking too much, but there needs to be a little bit of conversation about, hey, I realize I've been asleep at the switch here and I'm going to get more active, and you need to expect some different behaviors from me. Don't be alarmed. We're going to be okay. And, sort of walk them through the changes.
Walk them through the changes as opposed to being a dictator, being more of a, I know in the Christian theological world, there's a reference to the Holy Spirit. And I think the Greek word is called paraclete, which means someone walking beside you, not the Old Testament God of dictating. And if you don't do as we say, the lightning's going to come from the sky. There's this walking you through. They say the Holy Spirit just guides you through decisions and so forth. It's not a matter of follow the law. Mm-hmm. It's I'm with you on this. And it's interesting in different forms of Christianity. There's the people that say God is with you. And then there's the God told you, the wagging your finger type. And I like that whole concept of walking with you through changes.
Yeah. What are you doing it for if it's not to do it together? Why are you together if you're not doing things together?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So there is 3 conferences coming up, in about a month in Orlando. There's going to be like the 21 convention, the traditional one, the one that you and I have spoken at many times. And I think that's where you and I originally met, probably back in, I don't know if it was maybe 2017. I'm not sure.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And then there's the Patriarch one. And then there's the 22 convention, the whole Make Women Great Again thing. If you were going to prepare a speech, and I'm going to ask you about all 3, if you were going to prepare a speech for the traditional 21 convention, what would the title be? And you already know the audience. What would be the message that those men need to hear in a sentence? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I'll say, I know the audience and I love these guys. And, I won't be there this year. And I kind of regret that because I love the crowd. I love the guys that come to this conference. They're put together and they're just great people. And so my message, and this is a project that I'm working on right now that I haven't talked about too much yet, is being the gatekeeper to your life, being very mindful about the relationships that you allow into your world, because those, more than anything else, dictate your future and dictate your outcomes.
I'll be honest with you. As soon as you said be the gatekeeper to your life, I got goosebumps. I'm not a goosebumpy kind of guy.
Okay, well then maybe I'm onto something.
I think, wow, that's going to keep me awake tonight. Be the gatekeeper to your life. I like that. I know I work part-time in a forensic facility 3 days a week, and I have to go through what would be similar to airport type security.
Yeah, I know the pat down.
Yeah. And these are guys that are in there for life. A lot of them have been in there for 20, 30, 40 years. And of course, anything you bring in there can be used to kill you. So you have to there's a reason why they make sure that you're not bringing a screwdriver in or a wrench or, whatever. And those gatekeepers keep the facility safe. And whatever they allow through that gate is what goes on inside that facility. So as soon as you said gatekeeper, I instantly went to me going to work yesterday morning at 7 a.m. and going through security to get in to the unit where I work. Gatekeepers are important. But those gatekeepers are third parties. You're saying be your own gatekeeper. Whoa. Would you say that's a conflict of interest, or is that different than a conflict of interest?
A conflict of interest in what sense?
Like, for instance, if you're the gatekeeper to your own life, like, I want to bring as much Haagen-Dazs and kettle-cooked potato chips in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Then I would say it is absolutely a conflict of interest within yourself, because your emotional mind wants what it wants, and your rational mind sometimes needs to step in and override that and make different decisions. So if you're allowing all the Haagen-Dazs in the world to come through the gate, then you're hurting yourself, obviously. But so one of the messages that men are not getting, particularly from my profession has been so hard on men lately. It's just an embarrassment to me. Yeah. They're not getting the message that if you're on task, if you're on point, if you're doing the things that a man does to create happiness in the world for himself and others, then you have something worth protecting, and you need to be mindful of who comes into your world, because the people that come into your world, they can build you up or they can tear you down.
Wow. I I really think you're onto something. I'm serious. That goosebump thing, that just like that wave of like whoosh went through me when you said that. It resonated with me, and I can already see from the comments that it resonated with some people that are watching right now. All
It
right,
has a very
so
boring beginning. Okay, it comes from the work of Angus Bateman, who looked at black-bellied fruit flies, and he was looking at the way the females are gatekeepers to sexual access for the men,
yeah,
the little male bugs, and that work sort of grew into the notion of men being the gatekeepers of relationships and women being the gatekeepers of sex, which is that idea has been out there for
yes,
in that form has been out there for a couple of decades now. So
yes,
that's a very boring beginning of this idea as fruit flies.
yeah. I can't wait for that data to come out, and I want a signed copy of that book.
Okay, we'll do it.
All right. Item number 2 would be the Patriarch Conference coming up. What would be the message if you were going to be on stage for the men who are fathers and want to be fathers?
What would be the message? I can't even remember. I did speak at the Patriot Convention a couple of years ago. I can't remember what my... Oh, geez, this is embarrassing. I guess it doesn't matter what I already talked about, and I don't really know what my message would be. I'd have to think about that one for a minute. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that question because there's so much to think about. I mean, there's so much that. Okay, here's what it would be. I know what it would be now that I've been stammering for a few minutes. It would be about protecting your children from the poisonous ideology that is taking over education and medicine and entertainment. This postmodernist critical theory, everybody's a member of a group, nobody's an individual. We need to tear down all of the Western structures and replace them with I don't know what. They don't seem to have gotten to the conclusion what they want to replace it with. It's chaos.
Yes.
But so much of this critical theory ideology is just bitter and vicious and angry and resentful and ungrateful, and it's just pure poison. And I think what we're seeing spreading through academia, it looks to me to be very similar to the ideological push of the 20s, and then the ideological push of the late 30s and 40s, and then the ideological push of Mao and Stalin, and it's just horrible stuff. And so I would be talking about protecting your children from that, because it's a recipe for mental illness.
Wow.
So there you go. Is that enough?
I love that. That's almost like being the gatekeeper. It's like the theme, I guess, being the gatekeeper for your children, so to speak. So we'll just carry that theme over a little bit. Yeah. What about the 22 convention, Make Women Great Again? You're on stage in front of a bunch of ladies who already think that they're in the right place being in that auditorium. They want to become better versions of themselves. What message could you give them? What do you think?
I think if I was going to speak there, I think it would probably be just trying to give a little insight into the male mind and how we work, because the genders are a bit mysterious to each other, and that's wonderful, but a little bit of elucidation doesn't hurt too.
Yeah, I like that. All right, well, we've been talking for about an hour, and
went by quickly.
We've gone over a lot of topics here, and there's so much more. But how can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I have a little website called docsmith.co, and that's where you can find all my stuff. I'm on Twitter. That's my only social media, and I'm at Iron Shrink on Twitter. Okay, excellent. Is there? You said this Gatekeeper thing. Is that a book that's coming out, or a series of videos, or what's the? It is. It's a book I'm working on, and it's still pretty nascent right now. But yeah, I'll get there one of these days.
Do you think like within the next year or two?
Yeah, within 2 years, I'd like to have it out. But
okay, great.
I'm in that. Writing a book is fun at the beginning and it's fun at the end, but I'm in that middle part where it's a bit of a slog.
Right in the middle part. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm really happy to introduce you to my audience, and I know they've gotten a lot out of it, and appreciate your insight professionally and personally. I love how you said, here's my professional assessment, then here's my personal opinion, and you're one of the only few people that definitely makes the case for both of those and identifies both of those. And I think that's what makes you the great Dr. Shawn T. Smith, and I appreciate that.
I try to be a disciplined thinker, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail.
Yeah, that makes two of us.
Yeah. Well, it's
Thank
great
you,
to
Shawn.
see you as always, George. Thank you for having me on.
All right. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you, Shawn.
Okay. Bye now.
All right.